Grenadier's Leap. The First World War is renowned for its massive battles fought on an industrial scale, particularly the grinding stalemate that was the Western Front. Places like Verdun, the Somme, and Passendale have become legendary for their brutality and the fierce fighting which occurred there. However, one forgotten front of the war occurred much further south, and while it is often overshadowed by the other actions, there were still acts of heroism that should be given some recognition. In 1915, Italy broke off its decades-long alliance with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, hoping to capture territory which they believed rightfully belonged to them. For over a year, both sides were locked in a standoff. The trench wars that were common during that conflict were exacerbated by the rugged and unforgiving terrain of the Alps and Dolomite mountain ranges in the northern part of the country. In December 1915, and hoping to break the stalemate, Austro-Hungarian General Konrad von Hötzendorf proposed a major new campaign aimed at breaking through the Italian lines. The offensive would occur in the mountainous region of Trentino in northeastern Italy, which would then push south into the Venetian plateau with its more manageable terrain, eventually reaching the Adriatic Sea. Hötzendorf, seeking German support for the operation, turned to his counterpart, Erich von Falkenhayn, but he flatly refused to help. Germany at this point had not declared war against Italy, and its troops were needed at the ongoing Battle of Verdun, as well as on the Eastern Front against Russia. Falkenhayn urged Hötzendorf to reconsider the operation, seeing it as a sheer waste of manpower and resources.
Hey everyone, it's Chris. You're probably used to hearing me during our advertisements, but now I want to talk about something a little bit different. Every video we create is more than just content. It's a blend of research, creativity, and passion for history. We do it because we believe in the power of history, its lessons, its stories, and its ability to connect everyone. Sometimes the reality of operating a YouTube channel presents challenges, like the occasional demonetization, which impacts the ability to produce the content that we all love. Now we're looking at you, our amazing audience, to ask for your support in keeping this channel, our shared passion for history, alive and thriving. We're inviting you to join us on Patreon and contribute to the ongoing creation and distribution of our history content. By joining us on Patreon, you're doing more than just supporting our content. You're becoming an integral part of a community dedicated to preserving and promoting history. Remember, every bit of support makes a real difference. If you'd like to learn more about how you can help, please follow the link down below. Thank you, as always, for your interest and your hunger for history.
Undeterred, Hötzendorf planned the operation independently. He referred to the offensive as the Strafexpedition, or Punishment Expedition, as this was seen as a punitive measure against the Italians for breaking the so-called Triple Alliance Treaty between Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, which began back in 1881. Part of Hötzendorf's determination to attack Italy stemmed from his suspicion that the newly formed Italian nation would attempt to retake Italian-speaking lands that were under Austro-Hungarian control, something that was confirmed by the breaking of the pact. As early as 1911, Hötzendorf was openly advocating for preemptive strikes against Italy. Now, with the war in full swing, he was given this long-awaited opportunity. In preparation for the operation, he gathered 18 divisions and 2,000 artillery pieces. Among these were specialist mountain troops, whose skills at fighting in the rugged terrain of the Alps would be invaluable. For the first time since the outbreak of the hostilities, the Italian front was given priority. Newer, improved artillery and machine guns were sent south to forces in the Tyrol, rather than being sent east in the fight against the Russians and Galicia. Standing against them were the Italian forces, under the command of General Luigi Cardona. In March 1916, under his command, they launched their own offensive against Isonzo, the fifth of 11 such offenses that would take place during the war. This particular attempt was encouraged by Italy's French allies, who were hoping for the opening of another front to take pressure off their forces at Verdun. Like their Austrian opponents, the Italian troops were also undergoing an update of their equipment, including the artillery and machine guns, as well as changing their tactical doctrine, shifting away from massed frontal assaults to much more sophisticated tactics, utilizing the terrain more effectively and using infiltration, though their reforms were much less thorough than Austria's. The Isonzo offensive was largely ineffective and was called off as word reached the Italians of the Austro-Hungarian offensive in Trentino. On May 9th, Austrian guns opened up on the Italian positions, catching the defenders off guard. Along a 50-kilometer front, the Italians were battered by artillery, led by specialized mountain troops. The Austrian forces pushed deep into Italian territory, penetrating 12 miles in a single day. For almost a month, the Austrians ground their way forward, seizing territory and threatening to break into the Venetian plain itself. In spite of these setbacks, the 172 Italian battalions fought fiercely, in spite of being greatly outnumbered. Even though their center was driven back, the flanks held firm against the onslaught. Still, the Austrians were steadily gaining ground and would capture the towns of Arcero and Asiago deep inside Italian territory. If they managed a breakthrough, they could sweep behind the Italian lines and would be able to attack from the rear. Unable to withdraw further without risking a total collapse of the Italian lines, General Cardona issued orders to his forces to halt their retreat and to stand and fight to the bitter end, stating, quote, "Remember that here we defend the soil of our country and the honor of our army. These positions are to be defended to the death." End quote. One of the strategically vital defensive positions was Monte Cengio, a 1,354-meter or 4,400-foot high mountain overlooking the city of Venice and the Adriatic Sea beyond. Should the position be captured, the Austrian forces would have clear access to the legendary city and the surrounding plain, which would have been a disaster for the Italian war effort. Holding this vital last line of defense was the 2nd Regiment of Sardinian Grenadiers. This unit had a long, proud history, with earlier versions of the unit founded as far back as 1659, gaining distinction in the numerous conflicts throughout the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, including fighting in both Italian wars of independence. The unit was disbanded in 1871, but then reformed again in 1881. During the First World War, the Grenadiers had fought in the first 5 battles of Isonzo before transferring to Monte Cengio to halt the Austrian advance. Around 6,000 Grenadiers of the 2nd Regiment, as well as elements of other units, were waiting when the Austrians struck. From May 29th to June 3rd, Austrian forces launched assault after assault, supported by an intense artillery bombardment. Their aim to dislodge the Grenadiers and other Italian forces on Monte Cengio and the surrounding area. Artillery raining on the defenders between the waves of infantry trying to break the line. In the face of this maelstrom, the Grenadiers held firm, not giving any ground to the attackers. In spite of their bravery, the situation was becoming more and more desperate. By June 3rd, the Grenadiers had run out of ammunition as they were faced with yet another assault. Fighting in the narrow pathways and rocky terrain devolved into hand-to-hand combat, firearms being replaced by bayonets and knives, and even throwing rocks. In spite of the tenacious Italian defense, the Austrian soldiers kept pressing forwards in spite of heavy casualties on both sides. With the Italian defensive position hanging on by a thread, the Grenadiers knew that should they fail to hold off the enemy, the entire Italian war effort would be in jeopardy. Spurred on by patriotism, a sense of duty, or sheer desperation, some of the Grenadiers leapt from their positions and began grappling with the advancing Austrians. In one final act of defiance, some of them grabbed hold of their foes and dragged them towards the sheer cliff face, and with one final effort, threw themselves off, taking their enemies with them. This final act of defiance bought the Italians a little more time to hold back the Austrian tide. Still, in spite of their tenacity, the Italian forces were gradually being overwhelmed. The defenses were falling, and Venice was easily in reach of the enemy. In spite of this, the Austrians were unable to capitalize on their success, as the rugged terrain made the movement of reinforcements and supplies difficult. This bought some time for Cordona to rearrange his forces, plugging the gaps created during the offensive. The situation was still critical when a reprieve came from an unexpected source. Far to the north, the Russians had initiated the Brusilov offensive, a massed advance against the Central Powers in Galicia. In the face of this concentrated Russian incursion, Hotzendorf was forced to withdraw his troops to reinforce the Eastern Front. The Strafexpedition had ended in failure. When the fighting was over, both sides had suffered heavy casualties, numbering in the tens of thousands. Exact figures are unclear, but it is known that the Italians suffered over twice as many dead and wounded as their Austrian foes. In the wake of the rapid withdrawal of Austrian forces, the Italian High Command tried to capitalize on the situation, launching a counteroffensive, though this was hastily planned and poorly executed, leading to many thousands of additional deaths to the military. The political fallout from these disasters forced the resignation of Italian Prime Minister Antonio Salandra. The Grenadiers on Monte Cengio suffered titanic losses, with 4,478 casualties out of the 6,000 men deployed there. On June 6, they were relieved of their duties and withdrew to rear areas to reform. They would be back in action that August as part of the 6th Isano offensive and would fight in numerous other campaigns during the conflict. After the war, Monte Cengio would be declared sacred to the fatherland, and a memorial was placed to honor the lives of the men who had fought and died there. A rocky outcrop on the mountain was dubbed Salto del Grenadier, or Grenadier's Jump, in honor of the men who had sacrificed themselves by leaping from the mountain, dragging their enemies along with them. Today, the site is a memorial, marked by a haunting metal statue commemorating this act of heroism. Reaching the location requires hiking through the rugged terrain along narrow paths and through claustrophobic tunnels, though under much less hostile circumstances than the men who fought there over a century ago.